Citrix XenDesktop 7 offers a number of licenses. In this video, I'll discuss the types of licenses and any system requirements to note. In this video, I want to take a look at the Citrix XenDesktop licensing options. We'll touch first of all on the license additions, then we'll take a look at the license models, which includes concurrent and user device. So for the license additions, first of all, there are 3 licensing options available for XenDesktop. Keep in mind that there are other licensing options available for various Citrix products, so you need to explore the licensing options available and the features included with the different licenses as well. With XenDesktop, we do have the Platinum license, and that particular license provides you with enterprise level functionality for Citrix XenDesktop and XenApp, as well as support for cloud-based virtual desktop. You'll have HDX support, you'll have FlexCast for virtual desktop and virtual app streaming, including advanced management, there's advanced monitoring capability, and then there's additional security configuration for the Platinum license as well. Then we have Enterprise. The Enterprise provides the same level of functionality as the Platinum for the most part, with the exception of the cloud-based virtualization support. You still get HDX, FlexCast for your virtual desktop streaming, and your virtual app streaming as well. And then the third one is VDI. For the virtual desktop licensing option, again, it's designed to provide you with streaming of virtualized desktops, high performance desktops that users can customize. And then we have the license models. With the license models, you'll note that we have concurrent and we have user device. With the concurrent license model, it basically allows users to connect anonymously because there's no association with the user and the license, or the user's device and the license. So it's like an anonymous connection. The license is consumed while the session is active. When the session ends, then the license goes back into the license pool, ready to be consumed or used by another user or device that connects. This is in contrast to the user and device model, where with the user model, the user is identified as a unique ID, so this can be an Active Directory user, and then a license gets associated with that user, and then that user uses that license for each of the connections to either a virtual desktop or a virtual application, and this license will allow the user to basically connect to multiple desktops or multiple applications, and the license stays with the user. The same with the device option. The device is identified through a device ID, and it has to be an administrator approved device. But the license associated with the device then will allow the users to connect to any number of virtual desktops or virtual applications from the one device. And so still consume just a single license. So you have to decide which licensing model works best for your particular environment. Keep in mind that the XenDesktop licensing server does dynamically adjust the licensing usage based upon usage characteristics. So for example, if you have 10 different users that connect to the Citrix environment from the same workstation or from the same device, then licensing will use the device model. If you have a single user that connects to XenDesktop from 10 different devices, then in this case, it'll use the user model. So it uses the licensing option that's actually most efficient for your environment. We have support for single sign-on because on the client side, you had a receiver. Installation of the receiver provides access to your Citrix environment from any number of client devices. For the licensing function or feature to work, you do need a licensing server installed. We'll touch on that a little bit later. And then the administration can be done through a web browser. It can also be done through Citrix Studio. So there's a number of options. The next aspect of Citrix XenDesktop license management are the management components. Those components include Citrix Studio, and within Citrix Studio there is a licensing node which gives you the ability to manage various aspects of licensing, including the ability to be able to allocate licenses, being able to add additional licenses. If you need to connect to a different license server, then you can change the license server connection. You can view all of your product licenses and be able to edit those licenses as well. In addition, the Citrix Studio provides you with a link to the admin console. Then we have the Citrix License Server. The Citrix License Server is a required component that is responsible for managing the allocation of licenses to users and devices and maintaining that association. It is a software download that you can install as a standalone, or you can install on your Citrix server with other Citrix products as well. It is a free download and it can run on both Windows and Unix. Then we have the License Administration Console. This is a web-based interface that when you connect provides you with a summary of your license environment. This particular console, however, is more geared towards the management of the license server, where you can go in and configure logging for the license server. You can change the port configuration for the license server. There is some user management capability as well, but it really doesn't provide a whole lot of management as far as individual licenses. Then there's the Citrix Simple License Service, again, which you can download and install. This particular service is designed to provide you with a central location on your network where you can provide access for your Citrix licenses for all your products. Be aware, however, that when you run this particular service and you connect to the Citrix website, it will download all of your product licenses. It does not give you the ability to perform or manage individual licenses. So you need to be careful of that. The licensing architecture is made up of several components. The first component is the license server. The license server is the central component that you can install as a standalone. You can download it as a virtual appliance that you can run on your virtual hypervisor. And this particular component manages the allocation of licenses and tracks the license allocation. Then, of course, you have the license files, and these are the individual files that you download that license your product, and these files are stored on the license server. There's also what's referred to as a startup license. The startup license is the file that is used that establishes the initial connection for the product, which allows the product that's being licensed, whether it is XenDesktop or whether it is XenApp, and the startup license provides you with the ability to maintain this continuous connection, and also tracking of the product. It is a very specific file that's used that you should never modify or change in any way. It does store the licensing system information and keeps track of your product usage. And then, of course, there's your Citrix products, and with your Citrix products, these are the products that you're actually going to be licensing, whether it is XenDesktop or XenApp or other Citrix applications that you're using. And then, of course, there are your client devices. The versatility of Citrix with the receiver allows you to use mobile devices, Windows desktops. There's support for Mac, there's support for Linux. So all those devices make up the components that you can use to establish a connection to your XenDesktop or XenApp environment. And that's the licensing component for XenDesktop. In this video, I want to talk about Citrix licensing. With Citrix, there are a number of different ways to license your product. You can use the XenDesktop Studio to manage your licenses. There is a simple license service application that you can use. You can use the License Administration Console, which is also available through the XenDesktop Studio, and you can also go to citrix.com. First of all, let's take a look at how we can manage our licenses in XenDesktop Studio. I've got Studio already open here, so in the XenDesktop Studio, you'll see when you expand the Citrix Studio, under the configuration node, there's a licensing node. If you click on the licensing node, you'll see the licensing overview. This particular section gives you information on currently installed license usage. You can see a list of the products that you have licensed. You can also see licensing administrators as well. And this provides you with a list of users or groups who have the permissions to manage your licenses. In the licensing overview, you'll also see there is an action pane. The actions pane gives you the ability to be able to allocate additional licenses. So if you want to allocate licenses, click on the allocate licenses link, put in the access code that was provided to you in an email, usually from Citrix, and when you put in your code, it'll show you the list of licenses, and then you can allocate the licenses you want. The nice thing about this is you can allocate some or all of the licenses. It's not a all or none type situation. If you only want to allocate 10 out of 50, for example, then you can do that, and that's a nice option. And then you can add licenses as well. The add licenses link brings up the screen that allows you to be able to point to a license file. Here I have a license file, click that, hit open, and it allows you to be able to add licenses to your list. Now I've already added this one, so I'm not going to add this one in anymore, so I'll say no to that. If you bring up a new license server, I've installed my license server on the existing server where I'm running Studio. If you want to change and add a new license server, you can do that by simply click on the change license server, provide a new name or IP address, and you're good to go. You can also edit the product edition for your license. So if you want to manage your XenApp licensing and XenDesktop licensing, you can do that. Citrix has now combined the XenApp and XenDesktop management into one management tool. So when you do the install, you can manage both the XenDesktop and the XenApp application and their associated licenses, and you can also change your license model as well. You can also manage licenses through the License Administration Console. To access the License Administration Console, click on the link for a License Administration Console in the action pane. It opens up the console, and with the console, it takes you into this summary area. This summary area does not require a login. There is a configuration setting that allows you to change it. So if you do want to force people to provide a username and password to access this information, you can, but by default it does not. You click on the administration button, and this does require logon. So here you have to provide your username and password. The username and password needs to be your administrator or your Active Directory credentials, and provide that information. Select the language that you want to display in, and if you want to save those credentials, click on the Remember Me link, and then simply click Submit. This particular administration console allows you to manage various aspects of your Citrix XenDesktop or XenApp environment. The system information gives you summary information. There's the user configuration button. If you click on the user configuration button, this allows you to add additional users that you can give the ability to perform administration tasks for XenApp and XenDesktop. The alert configuration allows you to specify what alerts you want displayed. And then there are certain parameters or thresholds that you can configure with some of these alerts as well. You can also modify those in this particular console. The server configuration allows you to be able to take a look at and modify configuration settings for the web server, because after all, this is a web interface. And so if you want to change the port or modify the threads or the timeout settings, you can do that. The secure web server configuration, if you want to use a HTTPS or SSL connection, then you can enable that, and you can use your own certificate, or you can use a self-signed certificate there as well. The license server configuration allows you to change the port threads that's used by a licensed server. If you want to configure logging, there's a level of logging that you can modify. You can also view the log file. And the configuration for the user interface can also be modified. So when you made all those changes, simply hit save, and it saves your configuration settings. Vendor daemon configuration, if you're using a third-party vendor product, then you can also use this to import any licenses associated with that particular product as well. And when you're finished performing your administration with the Citrix License Administration Console, simply log out. The other tool you can use for managing your licenses is Simple License Service. And the Simple License Service is also a console that is installed with the Citrix administration tools. It is simply a web page. The Citrix Simple License Service provides you with the ability to access all of your licenses from the Citrix website. All you have to do here is put in your access code and display licenses, and it'll display and allow you to allocate all of your licenses. You have to be careful with this particular feature for managing your licenses, simply because it will allocate all of your licenses, not like manage it through Studio or the License Administration Console, where you can allocate only a specific number, a certain number, as opposed to all your licenses. Here in this case, it will allocate all and doesn't give you the option to allocate just some of the licenses. So you need to be careful with that. But this is an administration interface that is installed with the XenDesktop Studio when you do the installation for that. The other option for managing your licenses is through Citrix, Citrix.com. So you normally have a Citrix account. When you log into that Citrix account at mycitrix.com, you will see a licensing area. And this particular link allows you to activate and allocate your licenses. You can view your existing licenses. If you have any preview, beta, or temporary licenses, then you can retrieve those. You can download them as well, so you access your license file. And there are additional licensing tools and reporting tools that's available to you as well. And those are the various options available for managing licenses. In this video, I'd like to take a look at how we can manage our XenDesktop environment using delegated administration, or also what we could refer to as role-based access control. We have a number of concepts, the first one being that of administrators. The administrators simply represents a user account, really. It is typically, at least with Xen.7.5, an Active Directory user account that you've used to grant administrative access to your XenDesktop environment. And in most cases, it is the user account that you use when you initially set up and configured XenDesktop. Then we have the concept of roles. A role simply represents the permissions that controls the actions or the tasks that can be performed by the administrator. And then that goes along with the scopes. And a scope is a grouping of the objects within your XenDesktop environment. Within your site, you would group together all your machine catalogs, for example, and all your distribution groups. So your scope could include a single distribution group or multiple distribution groups, and then you assign the role to that scope, and that controls what the administrator can perform on those specific objects. Now, we have a number of built-in roles to help us with getting started on the administration of our XenDesktop environment. We have our full administrator role, and as the name implies, it is indeed the administrator account that has full unrestricted access to our XenDesktop environment, and by default is assigned to the all scope. Then we have the read-only administrator, which, as the name implies, has read-only access, so it can read configuration information on the scope to which it's assigned. So it can read, all the objects and the members of the machine groups or distribution groups and so on. But again, it only applies to the scope to which it is assigned. Then we have the help desk administrator. That particular built-in role has the ability to view your distribution groups and perform some session management tasks and manage any associated machines with those distribution or delivery groups that it's able to see. It can see the machine catalogs. It can see the devices and the host information for those machine catalogs as well, and can perform some session and power management for those delivery groups and machine catalogs. Then you also have the machine catalog administrator. This particular role has the ability to be able to create your machine catalogs, be able to provision the machines into the machine catalogs as well, can build them, and use the provisioning services. It can also manage your base images as well, because when you build a machine catalog, of course, you have to specify whether the image you're adding in is indeed a base image. So it can also install software, but it can't manage the assignment of applications or desktops to specific users. Then you have your delivery group administrator, and having the ability to deliver applications and desktop is a primary role for this particular group. Can manage sessions associated with the delivery group, as well as some policy and power management settings. So those are the various roles that you can use with delegated administration for your XenDesktop environment. In this video, I'd like to take a look at the steps involved in assigning an administrator for a XenDesktop 7.5 environment. To begin, you need to open up Citrix Studio. In Citrix Studio, expand the Citrix Studio node if it's not already expanded. Under Configuration, select the Administrators node. When you select the Administrators node, in the center pane, you'll see an Administrators tab. The Administrators tab lists the currently assigned administrators. There's also a Scopes tab. The Scopes tab gives you a list of the available scopes that you can select from when you make someone an administrator. And then there's a Roles tab that allows you to select from the various roles that you can assign when you make someone an administrator. So to assign an administrator, simply click on the Administrators tab, and then in the Actions pane, click on Create Administrator. We have the Create Administrator dialog box that opens up. Here you can assign the administrator and the scope. So here in the dialog box that as a caption of Selected Administrator, you can type in the administrator name. If you don't know what the name is, you can click on the Browse button. And this opens up the Select User or Group dialog box. From here you can type in the user or group that you want to assign. You can also click on Advanced. The Advanced option allows you to conduct a query. There's also a Find Now button. If you click on the Find Now, it gives you a list of available users and groups from Active Directory. Select the user that you want to assign, go OK, or you can double click on the user and it adds the user to the list. Go OK. And it puts the user account, then populates the Select an Administrator field. The next task you have to perform is to select a scope. As you can see, there is only one scope, one default scope. You can select that particular scope, just call it All Objects, or you can click on the Create Scope button that gives you the ability to be able to create your own unique scope. Simply give it a name, type in a description if you want, and then select the objects you want to include in the scope. And keep in mind that a scope is simply a grouping together of those areas of XenDesktop that you want to be able to assign administrative control over. And then just hit the Save button when you're done. I'm going to select the All scope, then we go Next. The next task we have to perform is assign a role. Here we have 6 default roles, and keep in mind that the role is simply a grouping together of the permissions that you want to grant to an administrative user. And as you can see, there are a number of categories. There's also the option to create our own role. If we click on the Create Role button, here we can give our role name, give it an optional description, and then you have a list of all the permissions that you can select from. So it's quite easy to create and then use your own role. I'm going to use the full administrator role in this case. Go Next. Then we have a summary, and this shows us the configuration options that we selected. Then there's also the Enable Administrator option here as well. Notice there's a check mark in the box for Enable Administrator, which means that the account is indeed enabled. If we want to disable it, simply remove the check mark. So we're going to turn it on. Then there's the Save Full Permissions report. This is a very useful feature because it allows you to generate an HTML report that you can view in a web browser that contains a list of all the permissions that you just assigned to this particular user. Then click on Finish. And then it makes the assignment, and you have successfully granted someone the ability to manage various aspects of your XenDesktop environment. In this video, I'd like to take a look at managing scopes and roles with Citrix Studio and XenDesktop 7.5. To begin, let's open up Citrix Studio. In Citrix Studio, expand your site. Under your site, you'll see a configuration node. On the configuration node, click on the administrators node. When you click on the administrators node, you'll have access to 3 tabs in the details pane. There's the administrators tab, which gives you the ability to manage and assign administrators. There's a scopes tab that allows you to manage all the scopes for your environment. And then there's the roles tab that allows you to be able to create and modify new roles. Let's take a look at the scopes first of all. Keep in mind that a scope is simply a grouping or a collection of objects like machine catalogs or delivery groups. And you are grouping them together for the purpose of assigning administration. There is a default scope called the All Objects scope. When you click on the All Objects scope down in the bottom half of the details pane, you'll see the objects within that scope, and you'll also see who the administrators are. You can't modify this scope. Notice there's no option to edit this particular scope. So you want to create your own scope. To create your own scope, in the Actions pane, click on Create Scope. Here, give your scope a name. So for the purpose of this demo, I'm simply going to call it Sales. And I'll make the description, for sake of simplicity, the same. Then I go through and I select the objects that I want to include in this scope. I'm going to keep it simple, and I'm simply going to use the machine catalogs, and I'm going to select the Windows 7 clients. And supposedly these will be the Windows 7 clients within the sales department. So there now I've created a scope. When I click on the scope, down at the bottom half of the details pane again, I can see the objects that are included within the scope. Now I use the machine catalogs. I could have used delivery groups or some other objects to include in there as well. Notice in the Actions pane, we have the ability to create a report. Now, a report allows you to create an HTML report for any user that you want to be able to take a look and see what access they have as far as administration to your Citrix environment. If we click on Create Report, notice it's asking for the name of the user or group that you want to run the report on. And I'm just going to use the Advanced and Find Now and select the administrator and go OK. So it's going to ask me to save your report. It's going to ask you for a name for the report. I'm just going to type in the name of the user, save it, and because I have one already created, it asked me if I want to replace it, so I'm going to say yes. So it's created the report. Now to view the report, go to the location where you saved it, and I've saved mine in the reports folder on the C drive. So here's my report, so I can open it up. Here I can take a look at the delegated administration tasks that have been assigned to this particular user. So here we can see that it's for the corporate administrator. I can see the scopes and roles. And as I scroll down, I can see the system control permissions that's been assigned to this particular user. And if I keep scrolling down, I can see that there are catalogs, the catalogs that have been assigned, and then the permission level to the catalogs. We can also see the delivery groups, which delivery groups this particular user has access to, and level of access can be viewed as well. So as you can see, this is quite a detailed report, very useful when you want to be able to determine who has access and the type of access they have to your Citrix environment. In addition to creating a report for scopes, you can also copy a scope. Now, copying a scope allows you to create an exact duplicate of an existing scope. So I click on Copy Scope. It's going to ask me for a name. So I'm just going to put in Test here. Put in a description. Select the objects you want to include. Now, when you copy it, it will include the objects that exist in the original scope. So in this case, it already includes machine catalogs. But if I want to include additional objects there, like Windows 7 delivery groups, then I can select that, hit save, and it creates a new scope that initially is duplicate to the original, but of course, because I've made changes, now it includes additional objects. So there's one quick way where you can build a scope without having to go through and select every single object by simply using copy. I can also edit my scope. So if I click on edit scope here, the scope that I just created, I can go in and I can make changes to the name, to the description, and of course I can add and remove objects as well. I can also delete my scope. So if I no longer require this scope, hit the delete button, you get prompted, hit delete, and then it's removed. Of course, these options to perform these tasks are also available by simply doing a right mouse click on your scope, and then you can copy, edit, or delete it as required. And that's pretty much it as far as scopes are concerned. Let's take a look at roles. To manage roles, simply click on the Roles tab. And here on the list, you'll see that there are 6 predefined or built-in roles. These particular roles you cannot edit. You can make copies of them, however, as you can see. So they really can function as templates or starting points for the new roles that you want to create. If you want to create a new role, but you don't want to start with the default roles as templates, simply click on Create Role. In this particular case, again, you have to give it a name. So again, I'm simply going to call it the sales role. Give it a description, and then select the permissions. What do you want the individuals who are assigned to this role to be able to do? Well, I want them to be able to manage delivery groups, and I want them to be able to create a delivery group. Let's save it. So I want them to be able to create delivery groups for sales. So as you can see, I've created a new delivery group. Again, for the delivery group, I can also create a report. If I click on Create Report, again, select the user and you create a report the same as for the Scopes report. I can also copy the role. Now the copy role option also gives me the ability to copy the default role as well. Now keep in mind that when you copy the default role, it creates an exact duplicate of the default. So in this particular case, I selected a full administrator, so I can create an exact duplicate of full administrator. But of course, if you don't want it to be identical, then you can make changes. You can remove options from it, and then when you have when you're satisfied with your settings, simply hit save. So here now I've created an exact duplicate of the full administrator role. With this particular role, because it's not a default, as you can see in the type column, it's custom, I can also edit it. So if I want to go in and I want to deselect some of the options there that I don't want this particular role to be able to do, then I can make those changes and save it. When I no longer require the role, I can simply delete it. And then this takes the role out. Keep in mind that when you delete a role, however, any administrators that have been assigned using that role will lose their level of access. So you need to be aware of that as you go through the process of removing roles that are no longer required. Any role that you've created, you'll see in the details pane. And if I just expand this particular section of the screen here, I can see the objects that have been defined or the permissions that have been defined in this particular role, and I can see who the administrators are. In other words, the people that I have assigned to this particular role. In this case, because it's a custom we just created, no one's been assigned as of yet. And those are the various tasks that you can use to manage your scopes and roles in Citrix Studio and XenDesktop 7.5. XenDesktop 7 offers a number of OS images. In this video, I'll discuss and demonstrate management of server and desktop images. In this video, I want to take a look at how we can use Xen Center to manage our Xen server and as well manage our storage and our operating system images using Xen Center. First of all, we have to install our XenServer. XenServer is a bare metal hypervisor. It is open source, so it's freely available. You do have to buy a license for support, however, if you want support. When you've installed the hypervisor, then you can connect to it using a web browser and do the installation of XenServer, or you can download XenServer from the Citrix site and do the installation. Just to illustrate the process for connecting and installing using the web browser, if I start up Internet Explorer here, and I can type in the address for a server using an HTTP connection, and I'm going to use the address here. And this takes me to my XenServer install. As you can see, I have XenServer 6.2 installed. And here I have a link to the CD image. So this, if I click on this image, it allows me to download the ISO for the installation of XenCenter. And I can save it, mount it, and run the install. The other option is to click on the XenCenter installer. And here I have the option of running the MSI directly from my XenCenter server. Then when you have installed XenCenter and you run XenCenter for the first time on your management server or workstation, you first have to connect it to your XenServer. To do that, you can click on the Add New Server from the toolbar, and there it's going to ask you for the name of your server, or of course you could put in the IP address. So I've got XenServer62.corp.local. Then it's going to ask you for the username and password. The default created user account, of course, is root for Linux. And then specify the password that you use when you set the account up as part of the XenServer install. Then go add. Then it connects to your server. And then when it connects to the server, it'll show you, what drives and storage and libraries have been configured on the server. The configuration for the storage resources can be done at the server console itself, or you can do it here through XenCenter. You can add additional servers. Having more than one server is certainly a good idea because it provides you with a pool configuration that provides you with a number of benefits, including high availability and live migration. So we want to create our libraries first of all. So we're going to create a new storage resource. And a new storage resource starts up a wizard that gives you the option to create a storage location for our virtual disk. And for your virtual disk, you can use NFS or iSCSI and HBA connection, or storage link can be used there. You can also create storage for your ISOs, and your ISOs are required in order to install operating systems into your virtual machines, of course. And you can use a Windows file share, CIF share, or you can use an NFS share. I'm going to use a CIF share for our particular purpose here. Give your library a name. You can provide a description, or you can simply go with the auto-generated description if that's sufficient for you. Go next, specify the name for the share, and in the share name you want to put in the server name or IP address that you're connecting to. And I'm going to use my IP address here and use the ISO share that I've created on that server. For the username, I'm going to use a domain user account, the administrator account in this case, and provide the administrator password. And go finish. It connects to the share, and then you can select that particular library, and you can take a look and you can see what ISOs are currently available within that share. And you can always add ISOs. If you add additional ISOs to the share, make sure you hit the rescan so that all of your ISOs show up on the list. There's login information for the share as well in the logs tab. If you click on your server, once you've added your server, you'll see that in the details area, there's a number of tabs that gives you quite a bit of information about your server, performance related issues, information, general information, memory statistics. You can see all the storage configured for your server, all the network interfaces that's being used, and the additional network cards, the speed, and so on. You can connect to the console for the server and similar to a remote shell connection, and run commands. You can take a look at the current performance parameters for the server. The users tab allows you to be able to take a look and see the domain that you're connected to. Again, you can configure the connection to the domain. You can leave the existing domain, or you can join your domain, and then the logs provide you with logging information, because as activities and configurations are performed, then it gets logged. And then when you've configured those particular settings, you're now ready to perform additional administration tasks in the sense of creating virtual machines and managing your ISOs and managing your storage. So that's how you get started with XenCenter and preparing to manage your virtual machines for XenDesktop. In this video, I want to take a look at how we can create virtual machines using XenCenter and XenServer. To begin, we open up our XenCenter application. In XenCenter, we'll see the server that we are connected to. We have an ISO library that gives us access to the various ISOs that we will need. And then I'm using local storage in this case for the storage of all our virtual machines. To begin, select our server, and we can click New VM from the toolbar. This brings up the New VM wizard, and as you can see, there are a number of tasks that we have to perform here. The first option asks us to select a template, and as we scroll through the list, you can see that there are quite a number of templates that we can select from. For sake of illustration, we'll select the Windows 7 32-bit template. Go next. Here we want to give our virtual machine a name, and I'm just going to call it Sales PC, because I'm going to be creating virtual machines that are going to be used by the salespeople. Now we can put in a description here, of course, to provide additional detail with respect to this particular virtual machine. The next option asks us to select the installation media. Notice we can select to boot this from the network. This is an important feature because it allows you to be able to initialize the virtual machine from network-based storage. In our particular case, we're going to be installing from an ISO located within our ISO library. So on our drop-down list now, we'll be able to select ISOs available as configured in the libraries that are connected to our Xen server or controller. And I want to select the Windows 7 x86 ISO. Go next. Now we have the option of specifying which Xen server we want our virtual machine to run on. In this case, I only have one, so we only have the option here to place the VM on this server. But if I had a pool of servers, I would be able to select the Don't Assign This VM a Home Server option, in which case then XenCenter will simply make the determination which server to use based on available resources. Go next. Here's where it asks you now the number of virtual CPUs you want to assign to the virtual machine and how much memory. And you can increase or decrease the memory as required. Go next. Here it is going to ask us now, where do you want to store the virtual disk for this virtual machine? In this case, I've only got one storage option available, but you can use the Add button to add additional storage, and you can also take a look at the properties of the existing storage. How big do you want that virtual disk to be? Notice you can increase the size. The default is 24 gigs, as you can see, but you can make that larger or smaller. Notice it puts in its own default description there for it as well. Go next. And then ask for the network connection that you want to use. If you have multiple network connections, you may have a LAN connection, for example, you use for management. Then you may have a LAN connection that you use for client access, in which case you can select the appropriate one to use here. I only have one, so that narrows down the options. Go next, and it gives a summary of the template that's going to be used, the name, how it's going to be installed, and so on. And then there's the option to start the VM automatically. If you leave this option selected, it's going to start it up and it's going to begin the installation of the operating system in the VM using the ISO that you selected here. So we just hit create now, and that's how you create a virtual machine using an ISO in Xen Server and XenDesktop 7.5. In this video, I would like to take a look at how we can use Xen Server and Xen Center, which is the administration tool for Xen Server, to create virtual machines. To begin, we open up Xen Center. Within Xen Center, we'll see our Xen Server that we are connected to, any virtual machines that currently exist, any libraries that you're attached to, and the storage that's been configured. To begin the creation of a new virtual machine, we can do a right mouse click on the server and select New VM, or we can go up to the toolbar and click on New VM. Now there are a number of ways that you can create a new virtual machine in Xen Center. You can use the import option and import an already exported virtual machine, and it can be a virtual machine that's been exported from Hyper-V or VMware or other third-party hypervisors. In our particular case, we're going to create one from scratch. So within the new VM wizard, the first thing we have to do is decide which template do we want to use. And as you can see, when you go down the list here, there are a number of default templates that are included with Xen Server and Xen Center. For illustration, I simply want to use the Windows 7 32-bit template. On this particular page, you'll also notice that there's a setting here for copy host BIOS strings to VM. This particular setting may be necessary if you're using OEM source for installing the operating system, because the operating system CDs that ship with hardware generally has some very specific BIOS requirements and configuration, and this allows you to include those BIOS settings within the virtual machine if you're using their media. We don't have to be concerned with that, so with our Windows 7 32-bit template selected, we go next. This page asks us to provide a name, so I'm just going to simply call this Windows 7 Demo. Description is always a good idea, including information here that explains what the virtual machine is used for, if it's provided for a specific group or department, or was used to run a specific application. That's a good idea to include that within the description. Go next. This particular step now is asking us what media do we want to use to install the operating system, because keep in mind the template does not include the OS. The template simply contains some basic configuration for the virtual machine. We have to install the operating system as a separate step. So here we can use the physical drive in the Xen Server itself, and as long as we have the CD or the DVD within the drive in the Xen Server, then we can use that to do the installation. If we have an ISO library attached, we click on the drop-down list here, we can see the various ISOs. Keep in mind that an ISO is simply a copy of the installation CD or DVD, kind of like a virtual CD or DVD, if you will. For our particular purpose, I want to select a 32-bit version of Windows 7, and I have an ISO here for that, so I can select that. Now notice as well, there's a link here that allows us to connect to an existing ISO library. So if I click on that, it starts up a wizard that allows me to create a new storage repository, and there are a number of different options that you can select from. So if it already exists, then that's great, you can use that to connect to it. The other option allows you to boot from network. So if you want to do a network boot to a Pixie server, for example, then you can select the option to do that as well. We're going to install using this particular ISO, so go next. This particular page now is asking you what server, what Zen server do you want this virtual machine to run on when it starts up and when you're finished creating it. In this particular instance, I've only got one Zen server. If I had more than one Zen server, I'd have a Zen pool, and it could start on either server that had the best resources available to it. Keep in mind that this particular feature does require that you be connected to shared storage. You do need some form of network storage, attached storage that your Zen servers can access. In my particular case, I've got one Zen server. We can see the storage available to it, so I'm going to go with that. Now we're being asked for the CPU and memory configuration of our virtual machine. How many CPUs, virtual CPUs, do you want to assign to it? How much memory do you want to assign to it? You can see the defaults, and you can adjust the defaults. For the purpose of demonstration here, I'm going to use the minimum amount of memory for Windows 7 32-bit, which is basically 1 gig of memory. Go next. Here now is where we can select to add additional virtual disk. By default in Zen Server, it creates one disk. Default size for that disk is 24 gigs. Now this is where you can click on the add button, and if you want to add an additional disk, you can simply give your disk a name. You can put in a description for it, specify how big do you want that particular disk, and this is a storage where it's going to be stored. Again, if you have more than one storage repository, then you can select which repository you want to use. I'm not adding an additional disk. You can modify the properties of the existing virtual disk that gets created. So if I click on properties here, notice this is the default name. Again, just default description. I can change that. This is the default size, 24 gigs. I can modify that as well. And of course, I can also change the storage location, again, if I have more than one storage repository. Well, next. Then there's a networking aspect. This allows you to select which network you want your virtual machine to connect to. I've only got one, but if you have more than one, or if you want to change the properties of your network connection, you can do that by using the add button. The properties button allows you to go in and modify the, select from available network connections. You can change the MAC address, and you can also configure QoS as well. So next, and it gives you a summary of your configuration settings. Plus, you can also have your VM start automatically. Keep in mind, in order to install the operating system using this particular ISO, you do need to start up your virtual machine. So I'll click on Create. It creates the virtual machine, and in a second or two, we'll see the virtual machine appear under our Zen server here. And then we have the option of selecting that virtual machine. And here we have various property pages we can use to manage it. And of course, if we want to install the operating system, we need to start it up and allow it to access the ISO and go through a process of installing the OS. But that's the basics of how you create a virtual machine using Zen Server and Zen Center. In this video, I want to take a look at how you go about installing the operating system into a virtual machine that you've created using Zen Center and Zen Server. So to begin, go into Zen Center. So when we open up Zen Center, I first of all want to go through a process of creating the VM, because as part of the VM creation process, you can sort of integrate or sort of streamline the installation of the operating system. So if I create a new VM here, and again, I'm going to use the Windows 7 32-bit template for this. So just go next on that. And give it a name. I just call it Win 7 Demo. Go next. Now here's where we specify the source for the installation of the operating system. We can select to use a physical drive in a Zen server if we so desire. And of course, in order for that to work, you have to have the physical media in the drive, a DVD or CD with the operating system files on it. Or we can use an ISO. In our particular case, I've got an ISO library that I've connected to the Zen server that has all the ISOs for various operating systems I'm working with. And I'm going to select the 32-bit Windows 7 Professional ISO, and then go next. And next, set the CPU at 1 and specify the memory at 1 gig, which is the minimum for a 32-bit version of Windows 7. I'm not going to add any additional virtual disk. I'm going to go with the default, but keep in mind you can modify this, increase the disk size if you want, or add additional virtual disk to your virtual machine. You can customize the network connection as well. I'm simply going to go with the default. And here it gives a summary of the configuration. Notice the installation source. It shows the ISO that you've connected, and this is what it's going to use to do the install. Now you see also here that there's the start the new VM automatically. If you leave this option selected, then the virtual machine will boot itself up as soon as it's started, and of course it'll boot from the installation source and start the installation of the operating system. I'm going to deselect that and hit create now. So now it creates the virtual machine. So we see our virtual machine show up in our console here, right beneath the Zen server. So now we can select our Windows 7 virtual machine, but keep in mind that even though I've named it Win 7, there's actually no operating system installed in it. Even though I have attached a Windows 7 ISO to it, it is still not installed. So if I go to the console here for this particular virtual machine, and I want to start it up, so I can hit start, and it's going to boot up the virtual machine, and of course it's going to boot from this ISO that I specified. Now I'm also going to select the scale box here so that we can see the console for the virtual machine in our window. So as you can see, it says Windows is loading files, so it's booting from the ISO that we have connected here. And so as a result now, it'll go through the installation of the operating system, the same as if you are installing on a physical machine, booting from the actual Windows 7 DVD. And so it walks through the process of loading the files, and you have the exact same options that you have to select for the install. It's no different really than an actual physical box, because the configuration requirements for the operating system still has to be met in terms of memory, processor, and in terms of disk space, of course. So as you can see, it's booting up. We have the typical installation requirements where we have to specify the language, the time and currency format, and the keyboard to use. So we'll just go next on that. And here now we have the option to install. Notice we can take a look at some options, considerations before installing with this particular link to look up additional information. You can do a repair as well. I'm just going to select install now. And the next step in the installation process, as I said, is the same as installing on the physical machine, where it's going to require you to accept the license agreement and then specify the installation type. Is it an upgrade or is it custom? I'm going to select custom. And here it shows the disk. We have a 24 gig disk that we're going to be installing on, and keep in mind this is the default and the size that we decided to go with when we actually created the virtual machine. We still have drive options that we can work with, and we can also load additional drivers. Go next. And here now it's going to go through the process of copying the files, expanding, going to do the installation of features, it's going to install the updates, and the completing of the installation is going to require a restart or two. After the installation is completed, you have to provide some basic configuration information such as a username and of course the PC name. So for the username, I'm just going to type in admin here, and then of course it appends that to PC to provide the computer name, which is fine. We'll go with that, and then just go next. Here's asking for the password. Type in your password you want to use, and of course you have to type it consistently twice and put in your password hint, and then just go next. Here it'll ask for the product key. I'm not putting in a product key, and I'm not going to activate, but typically of course in a work environment you want to make sure you get this done. I'm going to skip that, and then it's going to ask for how you want to handle the updates. I'm going to say use recommended settings. Set your time zone and your time correctly. Go next, and then set the type of network you're connecting to, and this of course sets your network profile including firewall settings and so on. I'm going to say work for that, and then it finalizes your settings. And And when that's complete, your Windows 7 virtual machine is ready to use. Keep in mind, of course, you still have to apply additional configuration settings, such as adding it to the domain, adding the Zen server tools to it as well for added performance. So there's a couple of housekeeping things that need to be performed, and some of these we'll look at in the next video. So that's how you go through and install an operating system into Windows 7 using Zen Server and XenDesktop. In this demo, I want to take a look at installing the Zen Server tools into our virtual machine that we created. The Zen Server tools are necessary because it provides some integration between the virtual machine and Zen Server, Zen Center, Citrix Studio, and so on, so we can perform certain tasks like performing a clean shutdown from the Citrix Studio or the Zen Center administration tool, being able to do a clean reboot, being able to suspend the virtual machine. If you want to use Zen Motion, perform a live migration, be able to create checkpoints and rollback, and being able to make some changes to hardware. That functionality is supported and provided through the Zen Center tools. Now you can run a virtual machine without the tools installed, but the performance will not be great. So it's much better that you have the tools installed. To install the tools, it's really fairly straightforward. First of all, when you select your Zen server within the Zen Center administration tool, you can see from the list of virtual machines which ones do not have the tools installed. So you can click on the link for the tool to begin the installation. You can also do a right mouse click on the virtual machine itself and select to install the Zen Server tools. Then you get this prompt. Do you want to proceed? And what it's going to do is it's going to mount the Zen Server tools ISO in the virtual machine and remove the current ISO. So if I select to install the server tools here, it takes you to the console. I'm going to select to scale the console so we can just see the desktop here. And you'll notice that in the DVD drive area there's an ISO that says the xstools.iso. And this, of course, is the ISO that contains the installation for the Zen Server tools. So here now we have the being prompted to run the install wizard, the MSI. So we click on that, and it begins the installation of the tools. So just go next. The license agreement, pretty standard. Accept the license agreement, go next. The default location can be changed for the tools installation if you want. Go next. And then click on the install button. And it goes through collecting additional information. The status bar, of course, you're being prompted because of user account control to allow the MSI to run. So we'll say yes. And then it goes through starting services, performing configuration. Then in the first step, when it prepares the installer and is ready to continue with the installation, you'll get the Citrix Zen Server Tools installer set up. Simply click the Install Tools button, and it goes through the process of updating and adding the tools and services to your virtual machine. As part of the install, it'll update things like audio and network adapter, video adapters, and so on. And then it prompts you if you want to do a restart. So for our purpose to finish the process, we click on Restart Now. Don't forget the user account control, allowing the process to make changes to the hard drive. And it performs a restart. After the restart, log in and provide the password for your user. And then it completes the tools configuration, and the installation is then done. Just click on the Done button, and that's how you install the Zen Center tools into your virtual machine, and of course the final restart. XenDesktop can use snapshots to preserve your virtual machine settings for a variety of administrative benefits. In this video, I'll describe snapshots and show how to create a snapshot. In this video, I want to take a look at using XenCenter with XenServer to create and manage snapshots. To begin, let's open up XenCenter. In XenCenter, to create a snapshot, simply highlight the virtual machine that you want to create the snapshot of. Now keep in mind that a snapshot is a point in time configuration setting of the virtual machine at the time you create the snapshot. So it's a great way to preserve settings, configurations of the VM when you're performing additional administration tasks, which we'll touch on a little bit later. To create the snapshot, you can do it a couple of ways. You can do a right mouse click on the VM and select Take Snapshot, in which case it'll start the wizard. And you can walk through it. The other option is with the virtual machine highlighted. If you click on the snapshots tab for the virtual machines, this particular page here shows you any existing snapshots that you've created. And you will see the option here to take snapshot. And as you can see, we have no snapshots currently existing for this virtual machine. So I'm simply going to click on take snapshot. And it starts up and asks, what do I want to call a snapshot? Well, I'm just going to call this one Snap 1 for sake of simplicity. When you're creating snapshots in your production environment, of course, you want to put in something a bit more descriptive. So if you're creating a snapshot prior to installing an application, you might want to call it pre-application snapshot or something like that. And then, of course, put in a description, because it's always useful to have some additional information about the snapshot that you're creating. The snapshot mode area, notice that we have a couple of options here. With the XenCenter and XenServer, we basically have three types of snapshots. Keep in mind that a snapshot is a two-step process. First of all, it creates a template, then it creates a copy of the VDI or the virtual disk. With the snapshot mode, we have the option of creating a regular snapshot, which of course is a default, which snapshots to virtual machine's disk. We also have the option of creating what's referred to as a quiesced snapshot. Now, a quiesced snapshot takes advantage of the Windows Volume Shadow Copy service. So for Windows VMs that are running applications like SQL or Exchange or other applications, of course, that make heavy use of memory, the quiesce process with the use of the Volume Shadow Copy service takes what's in memory and writes it to disk. So it basically flushes memory first. As a result, this particular process generally takes a bit longer, because in a lot of cases you're dealing with large amounts of data within memory that had to be flushed out. So it's not unusual for this particular process to actually time out. So you might have to actually try it a couple of times before it actually finishes the entire process. And of course, there is the possibility or a likelihood of some service interruption while it's going through a process of capturing this particular type of snapshot as well, but especially useful for those types of applications. Now, in our particular case, you'll notice that the option is grayed out simply because I haven't enabled or configured the Volume Shadow Copy service on our Windows 7 virtual machine here, and we really don't need it for this particular type of virtual machine. But there are some additional configurations required. So you might want to refer to the Citrix documentation to get that information and perform those pre-snapshot steps if you want to take advantage of the quiesced option. Then there is the snapshot virtual machines disk and memory type of snapshot. And what this does is simply captures, again, a copy of the disk, but it also captures whatever's in the memory of the virtual machine at the time that you run the snapshot as well. This particular type of snapshot can be useful if you're doing things like, installing or updating applications or updates to the operating system, and you want to revert back to the exact state of the VM at any point in time. So select the type of snapshot you want to use and simply click on Take Snapshot. And it goes through a process, and I'm simply creating the disk snapshot. And the disk snapshot can be used for things like backup. You can use it as a template. There are a couple of options. On the snapshots page for the VM, you will notice that we have sort of a flow chart or diagram that illustrates the relationship of the snapshot to each other and to the original configuration of the VM. It gives you a time and date stamp as to when the snapshot was actually created, which is very useful. And if you do right mouse click on the snapshot, you'll see some additional administration tasks that you can perform. So as you can see, creating a snapshot with XenCenter and XenServer is really pretty straightforward. In this video, I want to take a look at how we can work with the XenCenter and XenServer snapshot feature and apply or revert to a snapshot, make use of a snapshot in our environment. The snapshot feature is great because it allows us to capture the configuration and the state of our virtual machines at any point in time. If we ever need to revert back to that configuration, then snapshots allow us to do that. So let's say, for example, you installed or updated or patched a new application on your virtual machine. Prior to starting that process, you create a snapshot. Then you go through the update process or the install process and make configuration changes. After you've gone through the process of making those changes, you may discover that something doesn't quite work right. You don't like how it performs, the application. Maybe you're only using it for a trial period. The trial period has ended. You now want to remove it and revert back to the configuration of the VM prior to installing. And that's where snapshots become really, really useful because it allows you to revert back to that configuration very, very quickly. To do that, let's go into XenCenter. And here in XenCenter, we can see we have our virtual machine, our Win7 demo virtual machine. We've created a snapshot of it. So when we go to the snapshots tab for that VM, we can see that we have snap 1. This is when we created it. Now, of course, we want to undo whatever changes has been made to the virtual machine since the snapshot was created. And in order to do that, we can simply do a right mouse click on the snapshot that we want to revert back to. And keep in mind that if you have multiple snapshots here, then you can select any of those snapshots to revert back to. If you have multiple snapshots that were created in sequence and you want to go back 2 or 3, keep in mind that the prior snapshots before that will be applied as well. Keep in mind that snapshots, if it's a VDI snapshot, it's a copy of the virtual disk, be aware of the storage requirement because snapshots do take up additional storage. So you need to keep that in mind as you are creating your various snapshots and working with them as well. So when we want to revert to a snapshot, we can do a right mouse click on the particular snapshot we want to use and select the option to revert. It's going to ask you, do you really want to do this? Now notice that when you revert, you have the option of taking a snapshot of the current state. So if something goes wrong during the revert process and you don't get back to the original configuration or the configuration that you want, then you still have the current configuration that you can rely on. And that's what this particular setting is designed to take advantage of, actually. So if we click on, I'm not going to create a snapshot of the current state. I'm just going to say yes to revert back. So now it reverts back to the configuration of the snapshot when it was created, in this case on September 14, 2014. So that's how you revert and make use of snapshots with XenCenter and XenServer. In this video, I want to take a look at how we can create copies or clones of our virtual machines using XenServer and XenCenter. So first of all, we will open up XenCenter. To create a copy of a virtual machine, you can highlight the virtual machine. Keep in mind that to create a copy, the virtual machine needs to be shut down. If the virtual machine is running, then the copy option is not available to you. So you can do a right mouse click on the virtual machine and you'll see the copy VM option, or you can go up to the VM menu, of course, and then from there you can select copy VM as well. Now give your new VM a name. And notice the copy modes. We have 2 copy modes. Now it's important that you understand the difference between the two. It can have performance issues down the road. The fast clone option, as the name implies, is a fast method of creating the copy of the virtual machine. So using this particular option, it'll create a copy of the virtual machine in rather a short time period, actually. So as you can see, we have our copy one, which used the fast clone option, is already completed. If we take a look at the log here for our source, the log for source shows that it created it in 4 seconds. The reason it creates the clone so quickly using the fast copy option is because the clone that it creates is not an actual full clone, but rather what it creates is a linked disk. So in other words, the copy here using the fast copy option creates a disk that is linked back to the original or to the parent in this case. So it's still using the original Win7 demo virtual disk. This is great in the sense that it really conserves storage because it doesn't duplicate the entire full disk. So it's not fat provisioning. It's kind of a form of thin provisioning, really, which can be very useful and may very well meet your requirement. The thing to keep in mind, however, is that with XenServer, it has a limit of 30 links to a single parent. The reason for this is because after a while, the more linked disks you create, then there's going to be higher overhead associated with it. So disk performance starts to suffer. And if you stop and think about, if you take a disk and you create a template from it, well, by default, that template is a linked disk. And then for that template, you create additional virtual machines. Well, the disk on those virtual machines are going to be linked disks as well. So you can see how this can continue to grow, and you have a linked disk tree that can get very complicated. Plus, over time, if you create a lot of them, they really will have serious performance issues. So the other option available to you, if we select the copy VM option again, is to use the full copy. And with the full copy, it'll show you there, the storage that you want to use, that it's going to use by default. And of course, you can select alternate storage if you have more than one storage repository available to you. And here I'm going to use, change the name here, and I'm going to call it copy 2. And copy 2 will be the full copy. Copy 1, of course, is the fast clone. So we click on copy, and now it goes through a process of copying, and the time it takes to perform the copy using this particular approach is much longer. Keep in mind that the fast clone took approximately 4 to 5 seconds, very fast. In this particular case, it's going to take a little bit longer. So now, as you can see, we have completed the copy process using the full copy option for our Windows 7 demo VM. So copy 1 was created using the fast clone. Copy 2 was created using the full copy. And here with copy 2, as you can see, it took me over 4 minutes to create the copy. For the fast clone, it took me about 4 seconds. So quite a bit of difference. Keep in mind, however, that the fast clone, when we run that, it is still referencing the disk of its parent, which is the Windows 7 demo. And of course, this saves quite a bit of storage space because it's not using the full fat disk, so it didn't duplicate it. So any new writes will be written to the virtual disk created when we did the clone copy. Whereas with copy 2, it's got its own independent, standalone, separate 24 gig drive, which of course was the size of the drive of the Windows 7 demo that we used to as a source when we did the copy. So as you can see, it's quite easy to create a copy, but you need to consider the application of which option you choose. There's also an impact on storage, of course, if you use the fat copy or the full copy option. In addition to create a copy, you can also use the XenServer export and import option as well. So with the import option, you can import virtual machines and create them. You can select any virtual machine that exists, and you can export and then import in order to create virtual machines as well. Any templates that you have, you can use your templates, use the new VM wizard or the quick create to create new virtual machines as well. But again, keep in mind that the creation process by default it uses the linked disk method of creating. So you need to keep that in mind because there may be performance issues down the road. In any case, those are the options available for copying virtual machines using Zen Server and XenCenter. In this demo, I want to take a look at how we can make use of templates, how we can set up our virtual machines for template use and then convert those virtual machines to templates. So in XenCenter here, under our Zen server, we have a couple of virtual machines. We have our sales PCs virtual machine, and we have our Win 7 demo virtual machine. I want to use our sales PCs virtual machine as a template for creating the virtual machines for all the people in our sales department. So what I've done is I've installed the operating system into the virtual machine. I've configured applications, so it's got all the configurations and applications and settings that I want all the salespeople to be able to use when I create a virtual machine or when they connect and run the virtual machine. So with all these configuration settings now in place, I could do a right mouse click on the virtual machine and I can select the convert to template option, or of course I can also go up to the templates menu and I can do the same thing from there. So I'm going to click on the convert to template option, and you get this warning because of course when you convert a virtual machine to a template, it's not just creating a copy, it's actually taking the virtual machine itself and it's making it a template. So as you can see, it's a fairly quick process. So now we have our sales PC's virtual machine is now a template, and now we can use that template to create additional virtual machines. To do that, I can simply do a right mouse click on it and I can select New VM Wizard. This starts up the select the VM template, or select the new VM wizard where I have to select the VM template, and you'll see at the top of the list the template that we just created from our virtual machine is at the top of the list. So I can select that, go next, put in a name for the virtual machine that I'm about to create, select the installation media. Now with this particular option I don't need any installation media because the virtual machine that we converted to a template already had the operating system installed. And the nice thing about doing this is that you don't have to run sysprep, and of course you don't have to go through the OS installation over and over again. Select the home server. We only have one, so that's simple. We'll go to default for the memory and the CPU. And actually, these settings here come from the template. The default for CPU is certainly 1, but the default for memory is actually 2 gigs. Same with the storage location. Now notice with the storage location, it's going to use the fast disk cloning. So what it's going to do is it's going to create a linked disk for the virtual machine, because that is the default when you create virtual machines from a template. Now next, select the networking connection you want to use, and finish gives you a summary, and of course it also starts it up. So by doing that, we have now created a new virtual machine from an existing template. And it's important to note that it is a linked disk, and we can tell that if we go into the properties for the new VM that we just created from a template, go to our storage, we can see the disks there that it's using. If we click on the properties for that disk, and on the list of properties there, we select the size and location. Notice the information here that says that disk size cannot be altered as the disk is already being updated or is in use by running VM. That is, of course, this particular virtual machine is using a linked disk, and it's actually reading now from the parent, which was the sales PCS template. And so all virtual machines that you create using that template will reference the same parent disk, at least by default, unless of course you change it and use the full clone option. And that's how you convert a virtual machine to a template and create a virtual machine from that template using XenCenter. In this video, I want to take a look at how you can work with the various properties of your virtual machines. And we're going to use XenCenter to do this. So open up XenCenter, and in XenCenter, you can expand your Zen server You can also modify the view, and there are a number of different views that allow you to have different structure as far as your resources are concerned. The default is a server view where all your resources appear underneath your server, and then of course by site as well. If you have multiple servers, then it's sort of structured, by server, by site, by pool, and so on. But you can easily adjust the view here to view it in whatever fashion you require, and then of course you can build your own folder view there as well. To modify the properties and settings for any one particular virtual machine, you can simply highlight the virtual machine in whatever view you are using, and then in the details pane you have various property pages. On the general page, for example, there you'll have some general information about your virtual machine, and this is strictly for viewing, and then the boot options as well. But there's also a button here for properties. If you click on the properties for the virtual machine, this allows you to access additional information that you can modify. So here, if you want to change the name for your virtual machine, for example, or put in a description, then you can easily do that. You can also manage the folder structure that you use for your virtual machines and the tags. And these particular options are strictly for the purpose of organization, really. They don't have any relationship as far as the configuration of your virtual machine. It's just for your own personal structure and management, really. And then you can put in fields, which are also used for basically organizing your resources. But if you want to modify the processor settings for your virtual machine, then here you can see the CPU, and the CPU field here allows you to adjust the number of virtual CPUs. Keep in mind, you can't have any more virtual CPUs than there are physical CPUs within the host in which the virtual machine is running. You can also change your virtual machine priority here as well, which, depending on the application, allows your virtual machine to have a higher priority as far as resource access than other virtual machines, especially if you're running a critical application on that virtual machine. But notice here the virtual machine, or the virtual CPU field, is actually grayed out. That's because this particular virtual machine is actually running. So we can't adjust a number of virtual CPUs, or we can certainly change the priority. If we take a look at a virtual machine that isn't running and go into their properties and then take a look at the CPU settings, notice now we can adjust the CPUs here. We can go up to a maximum for Windows 7, depending on whether it's 32-bit or 64-bit, of course. You can adjust the number of virtual CPUs, again, based upon the operating system installed within the virtual machine. And again, change your priority. The boot options allow you to select the preferred boot device. The DVD by default is at the top of the list, and you have your hard drive, and then you have your network. You can deselect and select, then you can change the order as well, move them up and down and so on to meet your own requirements. The start options allow you to configure high availability requirements. If you have high availability, this allows you to specify which order this virtual machine will boot in. If you want it to be the first virtual machine to start up in the event of a failover to another host, or in the event of host maintenance, you're restarting the host, this allows you to control which virtual machines start first and second and so on. You can also configure alerts. Notice by default no alerts are configured, but you can specify alerting for the CPU for the network connection, and then you also have general alert settings, and then you can set an interval for your alerts as well for each virtual machine. The home server allows you to specify which Zen server you want this virtual machine to run on, or at least preferred Zen server. The graphics processing unit, or GPU, allows you to select which processing unit you want to use, and this is especially useful if you have virtual machines that are using high resolution graphics, require 3D. If you're using medical applications that oftentimes require a bit more power as far as rendering is concerned, and you can select the GPU to use here. And then the advanced options allow you to set configuration options so that the virtual machine can use more memory if required. The default is optimized for general use, which of course doesn't use any additional memory than what's configured in the virtual machine. But you can optimize for Citrix XenApp. So if you're running a XenApp application on this particular virtual machine that requires more memory, then you can select that option, which uses a multiplier 4 for memory, or you can optimize manually, in which case you can put in your own multiplier there for that. In addition, you have access to your memory settings for the virtual machine by simply selecting the memory tab, and then you have the minimum maximum. You can edit that, and then you can move the slider bars back and forth so that you can set your memory accordingly. You can move it up or move it down if you want to allocate it dynamically. The storage allows you to be able to add an additional virtual disk to your virtual machine, set the size and your storage location for that. You can attach an existing disk as well. So if you have a data disk, for example, you want to connect, simply select the disk and then attach, and you can attach it as read-only. For the virtual machine, you also have the option to activate or remove if the virtual machine has additional storage locations you can leverage. You can take a look at the properties for your virtual disk, and again, the name and description are options you can change, and the folder and the tags you want to associate with it. You can create your own custom fields as well, as we already looked at. You can adjust the size. You can make the current virtual disk larger. You cannot make it smaller. And then if you want to set the disk as read-only, you can do that as well. Then the networking, again, if you want to change the network interface, you can add an interface. You can take a look at the properties of the existing interface. If you want to set a specific MAC, for example, if you want to use the quality of service limit for bandwidth usage. The console, of course, simply shows the console for the virtual machine. The performance tab is interesting because it provides you with sort of an historical view of the performance of the virtual machine. And the zoom drop down allows you to look at it in increments of 1 year, a month, a week, and so on. And then the actions simply allow you to modify the graphing options. If you want to view the snapshots, and of course the snapshots tab gives you a view of the existing snapshots. You can take a snapshot if you want to revert to a snapshot. We've already worked with some of those. Additional actions allow you to create a new virtual machine from a snapshot. If you want to save it as a template, or if you want to export it, you can do those options as well. Being able to delete a snapshot, and then the view option simply allows you to change from a list view to a tree view, whatever meets your specific requirements. And of course, the logs really don't contain anything configurable, but logs give you an idea of the various activities and tasks that have been performed. And so this is how you go about changing the various properties for a virtual machine using Zen Center and